My guest today, Patrick.
Yes.
You had a interesting life, but
you could say that.
how many times were you close to lose your life, including overdoses?
Well, I began my trek with substances at about the age of 12 with alcohol and nicotine, cigarettes. Actually, preceding that, I had experimented with marijuana, but more and cigarettes actually in like mimicking people that I had around me. My older brother smoked cigarettes and marijuana, and I sort of played out the act of using those. But I started using chemicals like nicotine and alcohol and marijuana at a really early age. So that set me in motion to a pretty self-destructive lifestyle. And while there's obvious acute dangers of lethality in using substances like heroin, cocaine, things like that, people that use alcohol, marijuana, a number of other chemicals, your judgment is skewed and your inhibitions fly out the window, and it's hard to gauge the safety of certain situations. So there were several times where I put myself in danger without really realizing that I was putting myself in a dangerous situation. Just before we started, we were talking about not being able to hear well out of our ears.
Yeah.
And the reason that I actually can't hear out of my left ear is because when I was 22 years old, I was living in a house with 4 or 5 other male friends of mine, all drug users, and we were just hanging out one night. It was like a weeknight, boring Monday, Tuesday, or whatever. Watching like Third Rock from the Sun or something like that. I think it was 2001. And a girl that we knew dropped by very suddenly and just kind of charged in the house, saying, "Hey, who wants to go to a keg party?" And I had my hand up first. Before she was even done speaking, she said, "I can only take one of you." So I had my hand up first, so I went, and she took me over to a house where her friend lived. It was her friend's family's house, and her parents were out of town, and there was a group of people there that I'd never met before. It was 3 young men and a young woman who I'd never met. I knew the owner or the occupier of the house, and my friend, of course, who brought me there. And they were playing cards and drinking and smoking weed, and I quickly put myself into the situation and introduced myself to some of the people, and I had a couple of side conversations as we played cards and drank into the night. And there was a quarter barrel of some cheap rot gut beer that was there, along with some bottles of my friend
liquor.
left. I decided to stay because there was still beer to be drank. That was the sole reason I stayed there. I did not connect with the other people that I met that night. I didn't feel closest to them, akin to them. We didn't open up with each other. There was no real communal experience. But there was alcohol, so I decided I was going to stay and finish that beer. After my friend left, some crazy insanity ensued. The two of the young men that were there were trying to break through a locked bedroom door where the other guy was passed out, drunk, asleep, for I don't know what purpose, really. I think just to play around.
Just to open it.
Yeah, just to be, alpha males. And they literally broke the door off the hinge. And the girl who lived in the house, whose parents' house it was upset, obviously. And she was, saying things to them about being disrespectful and whatnot. And things very quickly started to get out of hand. And I realized at this point that, obviously the alcohol and the marijuana and everything was, playing a significant role in this, but more so, these people were just kind of aggressive, disrespectful assholes, and I was uncomfortable, and it was like, it wasn't the first indication that I shouldn't be there, but it was a big red flag. Like, this situation is getting quickly out of control. But because of my, I guess you could say, my dedication to my using, I stayed. I was like, nope, I'm gonna finish this beer. That was where my thinking was. That was what I was focused on, and I was determined in that path to do
kill
that.
the keg.
Right, we're gonna kill that keg. One of the men said, "This whole thing is his fault. He started this."
He pointed at you?
And pointed at me. And I was like, what? Like, I don't even know what they're talking about. I was being brought into this insane, chaotic situation that was fueled by alcohol and drugs and inappropriateness. The man that was standing to my right, I could sense that he was getting ready to engage me physically. He was clenching up his fist. He was kind of like going on the balls of his feet, back and forth. So I set my drink down on the entertainment center, preparing myself for this altercation. And very suddenly, I was struck in the back of the head by the other guy, the boyfriend. And I turned and I looked, and I'm like, what? I didn't expect that he would be attacking me, but he did. And then when I looked at him, then the other guy hit me, and it was just a back and forth. I was being hit from both sides and trying to block and punch, and eventually my head was so shook up that I couldn't stand anymore, and I dropped to my knees, and then I was kicked over, and I was being like stomped on and kicked in the back. And the girl who lived there heard all the commotion, came running downstairs, and yelled, "Stop!" And they stopped. But then one of the men, just before he walked away, came back over and kicked me very hard, right in my ear, and ruptured my eardrum.
And it could be worse.
Yeah, it blew up my head. It was crazy. The amount of pain and the sound. The sound that it creates when your eardrum ruptures is it's like suddenly being in like a wind tunnel, and it's excruciating, and like it was like a pain that went all the way down my spine. It was weird. The whole situation was so just insane, and it was all because I wanted to drink. I was bored at my house with my friends, and an opportunity came, like, hey, who wants to go to a strange place where you've never been before, meet a bunch of people you've never seen in your life, and ingest some alcohol? Oh, me, let's go. That sounds like fun.
And you were the fastest to say
Yeah. And a lot of my decisions were based on that sort of impulse, and got me into situations that were less than safe, and downright dangerous. There was another occasion when I was in New Orleans, Louisiana, and there was an altercation about to begin between a fella that people were annoyed with, that had been just kind of drinking off of everybody's booze all day, and not contributing anything, and he was kind of annoying. and somebody asked him to just leave. So he got upset and started spouting all these names at people. And I was trying to stay out of it. My friend Beth, who knew some of the folks in the group, got in his face and said, "You just need to leave before these large men beat the hell out of you." And he shoved her. And when he shoved her, I took notice of that, and I was like, okay, now I'm going to involve myself because she's my friend and I care about her. So I stepped in, and I pushed the man back, and I was reaching back to swing at him, lost my balance, and started tumbling backward over these big, sharp rocks toward the Mississippi River. I was literally tumbling to my death because I don't know if you've ever seen the Mississippi River down in New Orleans, but it's a very aggressive river. Like if a bird flies down and lands on like a piece of floating wood, putting just a little bit of weight on that wood, the current will pull them down, and they'll just disappear. People die in that river all the time.
So if you fell, you would drown.
Oh yeah, I would have been gone. Okay. And my tumbling down toward the water actually stopped the fight that was about to ensue, and everyone was just like holding their breath, like, you know, he's gonna die. And what happened, comically enough, is I had a CD player, like a Discman, and a Discman in my my hoodie pocket. It fell out while I was tumbling, and I heard it fall out and hit the rocks, and I popped up. I'm like, oh, my Discman! And that was like my concern, like not even thinking about the fact that like I nearly died. Oh, my music, you know, that was my thing. And you know, situations like that happen all the time because of my willingness to put myself in harm's way based on my my intention to just, you know, get as obliterated and filled with alcohol and drugs as possible. Put me in many precarious situations that by all rights and reason should have ended my life, somehow didn't.
And you said that you started experimenting or mimicking when you were 12. Mm-hmm. And I always like to go to the beginnings. Tell me briefly about yourself and your origin. What kind of family did you have? What kind of childhood that was?
Well, I am originally from Madison, Wisconsin. I grew up in this town, all over this town, actually. My parents, each of them had a son when they met, about 6 or 7 years old when they first met. And by the time I was born, they were married. And my mom had a substance use disorder herself. She, by her own admission, is an alcoholic, now in recovery, sober for I believe 15 years. 15 years. And but that's her story. But during that time, my early life, she was drinking quite heavily, and my father didn't approve, and they tried to work together in getting her some help at some point, and it didn't pan out, so he divorced her, and shortly after that he died. It was sort of a freak accident, you could say, almost. He worked for
how old were you when he died?
I was almost 5 years old, and he was 29. He worked for a company in town here, a foundry, and he worked with a lot of chemicals. And he had been exposed to a dangerous chemical called benzene, which is a solvent. Mm-hmm. And it got into his body and literally altered like his the way his blood went through, and it made all of his internal organs rupture and bleed out, and he died pretty quickly. obviously, because my mom already had an issue with alcohol, the devastating blow of not only divorce, but then the death of her child's son. Bear in mind also that my older brother, her first son, his dad also died when my older brother was just 18 months old in a drunk driving accident. So my mom did not cope well with the tragedies in her life, and that sort of set an example for me on how to deal with hardships, or rather not deal with hardships. The coping mechanisms I learned right off the bat were avoidance, distraction, self-victimization, things like that, and just pouring whatever kind of chemical on it you could find. Now, there is plenty of research to show that addiction is a brain disease. People are predisposed to addiction, and it manifests in different ways for different people, whether it's their job, gambling, food, sex, alcohol, or heroin. But there's an environmental factor too, and what was displayed to me in terms of like how to deal with stress was with the use of alcohol and drugs. I grew up in this town, like literally all over this town. My mom and I moved a lot. In fact, to this day, at 37 years old, I've never lived anywhere for more than 2 years, which is weird, But I've tried. But even as a child, we would move from one place to another, not because we were being shut out or evicted or anything like that. I think, and this is sort of classic behavior of people with substance use disorders, the geographical escape. I think my mom would become uncomfortable and maybe worn out, exhausted by the way our situation was, and thought that well, maybe if we move to a new environment,
things are gonna change.
Yeah,
if you
a
move.
little bit of change, maybe it could help the situation overall. But because of that, I was often uprooted from one school to another. So being able to find supportive friends, people that I could count on, it became more and more challenging as I went along. I mean, as any of us grow into puberty and get into our teens, and we feel all awkward as it is, finding stable friends and a group of supportive, healthy individuals to associate with is important. And I really didn't have that.
Didn't have a role model.
Yeah, so naturally, almost, it seems, very organically, I found myself hanging out with the misfits, the people that didn't feel connected, the people that already felt alienated, people that were, in my mind, like me. And oftentimes substance use comes right along with that.
Do you remember your first time doing any substance, any drug? Not alcohol, but do you remember the first time? I presume it was marijuana. Usually people do marijuana first.
Well,
but do you remember first time and what it was?
Actually, the first time that I think I ever ingested marijuana was with my mom. She took me with her to a friend of hers house, and they were smoking a joint, and I was very curious. I was a curious kid. I was one of those kids that always asked why, even at a really, really young age, even like 4. And I don't know, maybe I thought they were laughing and like they were enjoying themselves, and I wanted to participate in the thing that was making everybody have a good time. So I walked over to her and I said, "Can I have some?" And I think her thinking was like, she was hoping for like the reverse psychology of it, like, "Oh yeah, sure, here, try this, you'll hate it, and then never do it again."
Do it again.
And that might have worked if I had been a few years older. But I think at that point I couldn't really
And you
process.
were 12, you said?
No, I was like maybe 5.
Oh.
Something like that. And I didn't know how inhalation worked, so I swallowed the smoke because I thought that's what you did. And I, of course, I choked and I gagged, and it was terrible. I remember standing on a chair in front of a sink and like bringing water into my mouth and coughing, getting that terrible taste out of my mouth, and then finally clearing up and feeling okay again. And at this point, the joint was over, and they were smoking cigarettes. And I walked over, and I asked if I could have some of that too. And that is almost textbook definition of addict behavior. I engaged in something that was undesirable, painful, and maybe even humiliating. Can I have some more, please?
Once when you did marijuana, I presume you did something else, and then something else, and then something else, and eventually heroin.
Well, with the influence that I had of my older brother, he was kind of a self-proclaimed pothead. I remember he had these T-shirts that said UW Bong Team and Ohio State Bong Team, and it was like these cartoony characters, and I thought it was very cool. And I would often go into his room and like go through his laundry and take those shirts and wear them to school because I thought they were cool. And I wanted to look up to him. Given that my father had died, I didn't have too many other male role models. My mom didn't pursue another relationship with a man after my father died. She had several relationships with women, and identified herself as a lesbian, and which also brought some contention to my growing up and my relationship with her, because it made me feel different from the rest of my friends, and I was embarrassed to bring friends to my house, because they might discover this terrible, shameful secret, and then spread that around school or whatever other kind of community I was involved in. So I really jumped into this kind of image of the stoner, rocker kind of persona, because it was really kind of all I had to look up to. I also grew up watching a lot of television and MTV. It was the 80s, and I really wanted to be, like I had, dreams like many other kids, that I could become like a rock star, and looking back at that now, especially as I've come into my own as a writer, and studying journalism, and having been in several bands and been the front man and lead singer of things like that, I realized that it's not so much that I wanted to be a rock star. I just wanted an audience. I just wanted to be heard. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be appreciated. And oftentimes, I think growing up in my family, I didn't feel that. I felt kind of pushed to the side. I was an inconvenience. I wasn't high on anybody's priority list. And the drugs and the people that I discovered that also associated with that kind of persona, that image, the stoner rocker thing, we had something in common. Like I found community in that, and it was something that I could relate to people with. Like, oh hey, you like Motley Crue? You like Guns N' Roses? You like smoking weed and drinking beers? Awesome. Let's do that together. And it became a way of relating to other human beings that in a world that I didn't understand and didn't feel safe in, and it helped me find a sense of community and safety in a world that was otherwise very terrifying and lonely.
Drugs and criminal go together. They don't.
Drugs and criminality do sometimes go hand in hand. Like I said before, because a person under the influence of drugs isn't thinking clearly, or doesn't really have their safety or other safety in mind, they'll put themselves in precarious situations. But aside from that, in order to maintain a drug-using lifestyle, people will find themselves in states of desperation. And because of the way the brain reacts to that desperation, that need for that chemical, whether it's alcohol, heroin, sugar, even nicotine, people will experience this sudden just like a punch of like, I gotta get this now, and I'll do whatever I have to get it. And some people can
What kind of things did you do?
What I did was more along the lines of I would steal from family. I would steal money from my mom, my brother, my grandma, or I would try to con people out of money, telling them that I needed it for something else. I'd tell my mom or my grandma, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to this this big event on the weekend, and and I need $30 to get in, when the truth was I needed $5 to get in, and then I would use the other 25 for alcohol and weed. And then at some point I discovered that if I bought a lot of weed, I could have some, and then I could sell some to other people, and sort of keep a steady flow of my own stash, and have cash to do other things like eat food, or buy alcohol, or just seem important, because money obviously is a status symbol. So I would do things like that, and then sort of naturally, being around people who smoked weed put me around people who also did hallucinogens like mushrooms and LSD. And there seemed to be a demand for that within the group that I was kind of associating with in downtown Madison at the time, in the mid-90s. A lot of teenagers that I associated with were using LSD and mushrooms along with marijuana and alcohol. And I saw that as an opportunity to provide those drugs to people, and keep myself provided with those drugs, and kept money in my pocket. And obviously distributing drugs is illegal, but it was all part of the lifestyle. It was all part of the image, the persona. I remember being 16 years old and having a white t-shirt that had a big picture, like a matte photo of a cannabis bud, like a big, beautiful, multicolored, like marijuana bud. It looked like something on the cover of High Times. And I wore that around, and I sold weed, and I sold acid, and I sold mushrooms to my my peers, and basically proclaiming myself as somebody who would do that. It's amazing that, honestly, that I didn't get arrested for that on several occasions, but myself and other people that I hung around with who also did those things had sort of an attitude that as long as you keep moving, the police can't catch you. So we would never sit in one place too long. I don't know. And, we used a lot of payphones back then too, which is another thing that amazes me that we didn't get in trouble, because, that would be easily traceable. But yeah, that went on for years, and I would get in trouble with the police because we would be in a place, we'd be drunk, and where we're not supposed to be, and then of course police want to check your person to make sure that you're not carrying any weapons, and then they find this metal pipe that was clearly used for the smoking of marijuana. They would confiscate it, and they would write a ticket for possession of paraphernalia. As I progressed in my drug use, and when things escalated to the point of harder drug use, heroin specifically.
Now, speaking to heroin,
Yeah.
would you agree that heroin is far away different than the other drugs? Is heroin the worst drug of all?
Well, no. I don't think that I don't really look at drugs in a hierarchical kind of way, like I don't minimize some drugs and while vindicating others, or not vindicating, vilifying others. Like, oh well, weed is just weed, and heroin is like, oh my god, like so terrible. I mean, they are all terrible or not, depending on how they're used. For a long time, heroin actually was a brand name. Like the word heroin was a brand name, like Tylenol or NyQuil.
It was sold legally.
Yeah, it was sold legally, and people used it on a daily basis for different remedies. It only became an illicit drug, a Schedule II drug, after people started abusing it to the extent that they did. Once it was seen that it was causing such devastation, they made a prohibition of it. But people can be just as devastated by drugs like marijuana or alcohol as they can be by meth or heroin.
But isn't there a difference with the physical addiction?
There is. The problem is that heroin and other opioids, legal or not, whether it's a prescription medication like OxyContin or heroin that is bought off the street, what it does is it causes an acute lethality, meaning that if somebody uses too much of the drug, or if they use it in combination with another drug, they'll experience respiratory depression, which basically means your diaphragm stops functioning. It becomes too relaxed, and it's not inflating your lungs. And we need oxygen to survive. We need oxygen to keep our blood flowing and our brain going. And if people stop breathing, their brain dies, their heart dies. And there are drugs now that are available to reverse the effects of an overdose situation like that, called naloxone, otherwise known as Narcan. And now more and more people, police officers, paramedics, even common folks on the street can acquire that life-saving drug. There's trainings that happen all over that show people how to use it, and they can have it on hand in the event of an overdose situation. But the devastating effects of addiction supersede the acute lethality of an overdose, in that when people are giving themselves all of their energy, all of their ambition to their addiction, they're not investing in the rest of their life. They're not investing in their relationships. They're not investing in their future. They're not investing in their right now. You know, people will put aside necessities like food, water, housing to feed their addiction because it becomes so all-consuming. What might start out as kind of a weekend warrior situation where somebody goes out and gets some drinks and smokes some joints on the weekends could quickly turn into a daily regimen of smoking weed and drinking and not participating in responsibilities. And as those responsibilities pile up and people become more aware of how much they're sort of letting themselves down, they'll start to feel devastated and depressed, anxious, and then they start using the drugs not so much as a means of pleasure and having fun, but as a way of then coping with the devastating effects of their abuse of those chemicals. And it becomes sort of cyclical.
Sort of you use so you can forget that you used before, and it keeps going in a circle.
Yeah, it's just it becomes this endless cycle of I did A and then that caused B, but now I'm going to do C to deal with A, and then it just goes round and round.
That's right.
But yeah, I think obviously if somebody is smoking weed on a daily basis, or shooting meth, their likelihood of surviving on a day-to-day basis, they're much more likely to survive smoking weed. But the feelings that coincide with addiction, the state of mind a person finds himself in, feelings of alienation, depression, just the aloneness that they feel is similar, regardless of what drug a person may be doing. But obviously, we need to pay attention. We need to give heed to the effects of these acutely dangerous drugs like heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, because a person can use that drug that one time and die, and never have the chance to reinvest in themselves.
So as you said, somebody can use hard drug once and die.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said you had 13 overdoses in your lifetime?
Yes.
So how does that look like? I just had overdose. I almost died. But I'm continuing. What does a person think? Does he think?
Well, honestly, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. It's very surreal to even imagine myself surviving an overdose and then continuing in that behavior. But like I said, it's almost textbook scenario addict behavior. When I was very, very young, choking my way through pretending or whatever to smoke marijuana, recovering from that situation within like a few minutes or whatever, and then going right back and asking for more. It's insane. It's literally insane. That's an insane behavior. What is often described in recovery circles is a quote of Albert Einstein, where he said,
insanity is
the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I argue that is not necessarily a definition, more an example of insanity, but it still holds true that's the kind of behavior people engage in, particularly addicts. They will do the same thing over and over and still be baffled that it blows up in their face. It's like, how come every time I go to work stoned, I don't do a good job? Like, maybe because you're not thinking clearly. How come every time I get into a relationship, my significant other leaves me because they don't like the fact that I choose drugs over them? Like, well, duh. Like, it seems very obvious to somebody who can be objective, but when somebody's locked in that lifestyle and their judgment and their thinking is so clouded and skewed, they can't separate themselves from the situation enough to be objective. They can't see it for what it truly is, the sick, self-destructive behavior that it is, because they're too wrapped up in it. Classically, addicts are described as being self-centered people. Not because they are, morally inept or even ethically so much as it is they're so psychologically, what's the word I'm looking for? Psychologically divergent. They cannot, they cannot, not will not, but cannot see a situation for what it is. They do not exist in reality. They are essentially insane by a clinical standard. And yet they're walking around engaging other human beings and participating in communities and causing havoc and devastation in families and in workplaces and in all manner of community. And the problem that I see is that because addiction is so stigmatized, because it's viewed as a weakness and brings with it so much shame, that nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody feels comfortable enough addressing the issue, that it makes it more difficult to discover the solutions to these issues, to these problems, and getting these people the help that they need, because nobody knows quite how to engage the situation in the first place.
Have you ever been homeless during all that time?
Oh yeah, I was without residence for many years. When I was 17, I moved out of my mother's house for the first time. Determined.
Where did you move out?
What?
Where did you move?
Well, I was in Madison here, and I had an opportunity to move into an apartment with some friends, and that was, sort of the way I viewed it at the time was my jumping off point. Like, okay, I'm stepping into adulthood. That was how I saw it. Because like I said, my father had died when I was younger. There was I believe it was because of his job, through his work. There was a social security check that had been issued in my name throughout my childhood, and was going to be available until I was either 18 or 21 if I was still signed up in some sort of education.
In school.
Yeah. And there was one in my mom's name, but that stopped when I turned 16. And it was, started out like $300 or $400, and over the years increased up to like $800 by the time I was 17. So I was going to use that money to get myself kind of started as an adult in an apartment with friends who were also adults, while continuing in education and working part-time. And I was going to sort of start myself off. However, the people that I got this apartment with were all heavy drug users and drinkers, so obviously it was not a healthy environment. And there was a lot of dysfunction and a lot of insanity, people acting just crazy all the time, and it became an unlivable situation as far as I was concerned. So I decided to retract, and I went back to my mom's house after about 6 months. But because I didn't know how these things worked, I wasn't very responsible at the time. And even though I was only 17 when I signed my name on the lease, when all of my friends were evicted from that apartment, which was kind of inevitable as I saw it, my name was included in that eviction. And evictions carry along with people on their record. So whenever you apply for a new apartment, any landlord can look back and see that you have an eviction on your record. So having to always explain that, like, I wasn't with everybody when they were evicted. It's an unbelievable story if you're a property owner or a property manager. A lot of them would be like, yeah, right, of course, you were the one that wasn't responsible, as everyone else I'm sure said. But my fault is that I didn't go to the property managers and explain, hey, I'm moving out, take me off the lease. So, but I didn't know any better at the time. I was only 17. So I moved back in with my mom, and all the time here, still not preparing myself for my future. I wasn't working regularly. I was going to school, but I was going to night school, so very little responsibility. My drug using took precedent over all of that. So eventually, I was just finding myself not trying to be on a lease anymore, not trying to have any responsibility. I was the guy on the couch. I was like, I would approach friends of mine like, hey, can I give you $100 and stay at your place for like a month? Like there was never any, I wasn't building any foundation. And because of my addiction, I found myself charged with possession burglary. Found myself charged with burglary when I was caught trying to steal beer from a bar, a tavern downtown. Again, because we just ran out of alcohol and I wanted to seem important. I thought if I come back to the apartment after going to the store to get cigarettes with a case of beer after we'd run out, like, hey, everybody, I saved the day, and now we have more beer. And I was caught and charged with burglary because, I was caught in possession of the item still in the building. And I was on probation for that, and being on probation, having the eviction, all these things made it very difficult to find, adequate housing. Plus, all of my friends and associates were alcohol and drug users. So,
did you have to sleep on the street ever?
Well, I got there eventually. After years of couch surfing and, dipping in and out of my mom's apartments where she moved and lived in different places. And I never really had like a place there. It was, again, even at my mom's house, I was the guy on the couch, or sleeping on the floor. And when I found myself in an opportunity to start traveling around the country, I kind of fell into it, but it was acceptable to me to do that. That sort of nomadic lifestyle of hitchhiking from city to city, place to place, was acceptable because like I said, I didn't have any foundation. I didn't have any responsibilities. It was easy for me to pack up a few things in a bag and head out to the highway.
And what did drove you from place to place? How does that lifestyle looks like, hitchhiking, going all over the country? Like, in that time, what did, for example, make you moving from one place to another? Just because you can, or?
Well, yeah, a lot of it was, just because I could. But deep down, I was running. I was running away. On the surface, it seems like I was running too, Like, oh, I'm going to this place, or I'm going to find this person, or to see that guy, or this girl. But the reality is that I was running away in the same way that my mom would have us move from one apartment to another within this city.
Mm-hmm.
I was jumping from city to city, trying to escape the way that I felt about myself in this world. I was afraid. I was feeling alone, and not feeling okay with feeling afraid and alone. And by the time I had discovered heroin, I was just going with the motions of of just drinking all the time, and smoking weed, and just hanging out and really doing nothing. But when I did do that drug, when I did find myself in that position where it was available, and I did heroin for the first time, I felt something that I'd never felt before.
Do you remember that moment when you done heroin first time?
Oh yeah, I remember.
Was
very,
it
very
shooting
clearly.
up?
Yes. Yeah, okay. I had a friend, my friend Beth, who I'd mentioned earlier, in New Orleans. She had been using heroin for a number of years, and trying to get away from it, and having a hard time with that. And at the time, of course, I didn't appreciate how devastating addiction could be. I didn't identify myself as an addict. I was just a dude who liked to party.
Cool guy.
Right. But I made the decision to try it because I honestly, I wanted to understand why it was so hard for her to stop. Not just her, but a number of friends of mine would often complain about being dope sick, withdrawing, and how they wish they'd never started.
And you heard that so many times.
I heard it all the time, but I didn't view it as oh, that's a dangerous thing, I should stay away. I just looked at them as being weak, and they couldn't handle their shit, is the way I saw it. And I made a conscious decision to try the drug heroin because I wanted to know what the big deal was. I wanted to see what was so great about this drug that my friends were literally falling all over themselves to keep doing it. And she set me up with a shot in a needle. And she gave me such a small amount because she was, concerned that, it could kill me. Obviously, she understood the dangers of the drug. And I was clear on that fact as well. She gave me such a little amount that I didn't feel anything. And I remember that moment being one of those kind of fork in the road, very pivotal moments in my life where I was like, yeah, this I didn't really feel anything. It wasn't that great. And I remember looking out of the room into the kitchen, and I saw on the counter was a bottle of whiskey that I had bought, and some soda. And I was thinking, I should just go make another drink, just go that way. And then she said, well, I only gave you a little bit because I didn't want you to, I didn't want it to hurt you, but if you want, I can make you another one, and I'll put a little bit more in it. And it was in that moment where I was like, okay, I can go this way, or I can go that way. And I wasn't satisfied. I felt like I hadn't learned what I wanted to know yet. So I was like, okay, I'll take another one. She set up another shot. I gave her my arm. She very gently went through the process, and I felt what Roger Waters explained in that Pink Floyd song, just a little pinprick. And I said verbatim, oh, so this is what it feels like. And I don't know what I really meant in those words when I said that, other than, oh, this is what it feels like this is what heroin feels like. But what I think I really meant is, this is what all the fuss is about. This is what people will will suffer for. They will put themselves through hell and agony and pain and frustration and stress to feel this feeling. And what that feeling was, the best way I can identify it, was a feeling of safety. It made me feel safe, like nothing mattered. It was like all of the pain and the struggle and the torment that I'd felt throughout my entire life, it was like it was just wiped away. It didn't matter anymore that my dad died when I was young. It suddenly didn't concern me that my mother was emotionally unavailable to me growing up. It didn't matter that I moved around so much that I didn't make a whole lot of really good friends, in all the schools I went to. None of that mattered. None of that mattered. All that mattered was that I felt warm and safe and content.
So you finally didn't have anything to run away from.
Right. I no longer had to run. I had found a home, if you will. And unfortunately, anything that feels that good, that is that easy, is not good for you. and I continued using it for about 6 months in what a lot of heroin addicts describe as chipping.
Chipping?
Yeah, chipping. It's a term that people use to basically say, like, they're not totally invested in it. They're not thoroughly addicted, like chemically dependent. Mm-hmm. Like they just use it occasionally, but it literally only takes 19 days of habitual use to become chemically dependent, physically addicted. But
so you can get away if you do it just once or twice. Or
right.
You can.
Yeah, it's possible.
Possible.
Not advised, obviously, but it's possible. But I wasn't using it every single day. I was using it intermittently, is what I mean. So chipping for about 6 months. And after about 6 months, or within that 6 months, I had received a large inheritance from my father's mother. My grandmother had died, and I had no idea at the time, but she had quite a large estate worth about $300,000.
Wow.
And I have several cousins. My father had a sister who tragically also died very young of an asthma attack. And she had 3 sons. My father had a son, as I'd said, when he met my mother. So this money, this $300,000, was dispersed between her 2 children. But because her 2 children were no longer alive, it was then dispersed amongst their children. So cut in half, and then cut in half again, and then over here it was cut 3 ways for my cousins. So I received a check one day out of the blue for $37,500. And this is after I had started using heroin. I'd been using heroin for a few months, for about 3 months. And just here and there, when, I had a couple of bucks to spend on it, or when, one of my friends had some to give me, all of a sudden I had all of this money at my disposal. And I started using quite a bit more, but still not every day. Like I said, intermittently. But again, backing up to, same scenario when I found the $20, that I stole from my mom to buy the candy. Same situation as when I tried to steal that beer, because we ran out and I wanted to, seem important and be relevant. Oh, I have all this money now. I can be the star. I can, everybody's gonna come to me, and I got all the answers. I got all the money, and let's go have a good time. Let's go to Red Lobster. Let's go to the strip club. Let's go to Vegas. Let's go to Vegas. So some friends of mine and I decided we were going to go to Vegas. But because I had spent the last 6 months or so traveling in a car back and forth to New Orleans, I was like, you know what? I really don't want to drive. My friends all wanted to drive. I didn't want to drive. So I was like, you know what? You guys drive. I'll catch up with you. I'll fly. I'll meet you there. So I did. And got there, met up with them, and it was a bad experience. It was not a fun time. First of all, I was the only one that had any real income. I was also the only one that had an ID that proved that I was 21. One of my friends that was there, who was a little bit older than me, he was 25. He had no ID. Another guy that was with us, he was only 19. And then another guy wasn't even a legal adult. He was only 17, and he was the guy driving the car. So we didn't have a great time at the casinos. We ended up leaving Las Vegas, no pun intended there. We left Las Vegas on our way to Dallas, Texas, driving, where my friend Toby, the 25-year-old, was currently living with a woman. And we were pulled over just outside of Tucson because we had stopped in Phoenix outside of a 7-Eleven and bought some weed from a guy that we met in the parking lot. And we got very, very high, and we pulled off to go to the bathroom. Actually, it was weird because sometimes when I would get really, really stoned, I would feel like I had to pee, even though I didn't. But I just felt like I did. It was like a weird sort of sense of vulnerability that I would just experience. And I'd be like, I need to go to the bathroom. So we pulled off just outside of Tucson at this truck stop or convenience store or something. And it was very full of people, and there was a line for the bathroom. So we were just kind of wandering around the store, waiting for the bathroom to become available. We were in there for like 20 minutes, just wandering around, looking very stoned and weird. And then we left. We didn't even get back on the highway. We were pulled over on the on-ramp because a police officer saw us in the store, and obviously we looked suspicious and on drugs. Well, the driver of the car, who was 17, didn't he had at one point in time been a runaway. He had reconciled with his mother, but she hadn't called the 800 number to notify.
So he was still on the...
Right, he was still on this list. So when they checked his name, they're like, we need to take you into custody. And we're like, well, how long are you going to have him? He says, well, either until he turns 18 and he's a legal adult, or his parents come and get him. Take it. Didn't matter. The cops couldn't let us take the car because nobody had a license. So we had to grab what we could and just travel down the road. And here we were walking through the desert with what we could carry. This dude pulls up in another car with some people. Gets out and is like, hey man, how you doing? I'm Brandon. What's your name? Where are you from? I'm like, oh, my name's Pat. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, and I just got here. Oh, hey man, my friend was just there. He's got this big bus, him and his wife, and they got this dog named Shakedown, and they're traveling around the country in this big hippie bus, and they go from rainbow gathering to rainbow gathering. Rainbow gathering is like a sort of like Woodstock without awesome bands. But yeah, they have the camps throughout the year, and so this guy, he knew somebody that had just been in Madison, and I knew the guy he was talking about. But what he didn't know is that this person had died. This bus that they had rolled over while they were driving down the highway, and everybody, including the dog, died except for the wife that was driving. And he didn't know this, so I felt obligated to tell him. And because of this, he and I, and his amazing personality, he and I bonded really quickly and became like fast friends. And we hung out for like the next month or so. We were there for a while. Like this rally carries on, and we were having a really good time. And then I started asking around to people like, hey, is anybody interested in driving me back to Madison? It was getting to be like the end of August, and it was going to get cold soon, for here. And my mom was still here. I had a girlfriend here that I wanted to see. So I asked if anybody had a way to drive me back, and Brandon was like, "Yeah, man, totally. I've family in La Crosse, and it'd be great if I could take you back. I can go visit them, and you can show me around Madison." And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that." And then I remembered that I had a warrant here for trespassing for when I had I was at a party once, and I was drunk and on acid, and left the party, walked down the street, and then tried to go back to the party, and I went into the wrong house, and I was pounding on this door for people to let me in, and they weren't answering, and I because I was so out of my mind, I thought they were like purposely just trying to like be
kick you out of the party,
right? And I ended up sitting down, and the police came, and they arrested me for trespassing. Anyway, I never took care of that. I dipped out of town before going to court, so I had this warrant. And I decided at the last minute that I didn't want to drive back into Wisconsin with Brandon, because he had kind of a piece of shit car, and I knew that if we were driving in, there was a really good chance we'd be pulled over just because this car looked like crap. And so the night before we were planning on leaving, I told him, I was like, "Hey man, I think maybe I'm just gonna fly. I think I'm just gonna fly back." He left the house that night after I'd passed out. I think he was gonna go to his mom's for some reason or another. I think it was probably to drop off all the stuff that he had in his trunk, because he was ready. He was packed up and ready to go. I think he decided to drive back to his mom's to drop off all that stuff and maybe sleep or whatever, and he was probably going to come back the next day. But as he was coming up on the highway, he was coming up too fast, and he sideswiped another car, and he lost control and tumbled,
crashed and died.
And I immediately accepted full responsibility for that situation. I 100% blamed myself. I on some level, I still do accept responsibility for that situation. I mean, obviously I didn't put him in his car and send him on his way. I didn't do that. But I recognize my role in that situation. And I still think, to this day, I have an appropriate, healthy amount of guilt for that. But at the time, it was devastating guilt, and I didn't want to feel any of that. And it didn't matter how much beer I drank, how much whiskey I drank, how much weed I smoked. I couldn't shake off how bad I felt. But I knew of something that could.
Heroin.
And I made up my mind that while still there, that I was going to make my way back to Madison. I was going to fly back, and once I got here, I was going to fully invest myself in a heroin habit. I was determined that I'm gonna get heroin. I'm gonna do it every single day. And in some ways, and this is gonna sound a little crazy, heroin in some ways kind of saved my life, because it was either that or kill myself, because I couldn't stand to be with me anymore. I didn't want to feel me, and it was either do heroin or end my life. So I decided I was going to do heroin, and maybe that would kill me, or maybe not. I don't know. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was, I still had thousands of dollars, about $13,000 left out of the $37,000. Yeah. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to do all this money up in heroin until either I run out of money or it kills me. And then I found out that I was getting another check. It was split. I was getting another check for $30,400. And so I did run out of the first bit of money, and I was flat broke for about a month. But I had a deal with my dealer. I told him, I explained it, I showed him the paperwork even, that like, I got this money coming. If you can just bring me like 1 bag of dope a day for like the next few weeks, you know, when I get the money, I'll give you $1,000. He's like, okay, sure. So yeah. And then when I got that money, I very quickly, my habit escalated and my tolerance rose very fast. And before I knew it, I was shooting up $300 worth of heroin a day. And also buying a bunch of alcohol and cocaine and whatever else I wanted. And that $30,000 was gone in about 7 or 9 weeks. And I really, really hoped that I was going to die before that money was over, because that was a big habit to have in this town. And I wasn't. The money was gone. I was alive, and I was very, very ill and sick and hating everything. And I finally understood what all those friends of mine were talking about. Like, oh man, it sucks. I really wish I'd never done this. I hate being a junkie, and all that talk of mine, you know, saying like, well, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop doing it then? If it sucks so bad, just stop. All of that made sense to me finally. It was like, oh yeah, no, you can't just stop. You can't just not do it all of a sudden and just suffer. That makes no sense. That's crazy. So then I became a sort of professional middleman. And anybody that I could find that was looking for heroin, I would try to hook that up for them so that I could get a little bit for myself. I also learned along the way, in my traveling, my hitchhiking, that if you stand near like a Walmart or a mall or an off-ramp with a cardboard sign that says traveling broke and hungry, people will give you money. They'll open up their car window and they'll hand you dollars or fives or 10s or 20s, sometimes $100 bill, or food, or whatever, clothes. People will just give you stuff. It's amazing. And when you stand there and you're so preoccupied with the fact that you feel like absolute garbage and you just want to not be suffering, you want to just not be in pain, you want your insides to not hurt, you want your brain to stop feeling like it's on fire with that singular thought of, I need some dope. Looking at this line of cars and knowing that like every so often they're going to open their window and they're going to give me money. I'm going to take that money and I'm going to convert that into drugs. And then I'm going to use those drugs to satisfy my urgency to not feel the pain that I feel, whether it's emotional, physical, or psychological. And I existed like that for like 9.5 years.
And after all this 9.5 years and doing a lot of alcohol, drugs, and heroin, it came out that vodka sobered you up, but it wasn't your vodka.
Yeah, the cheap vodka.
How did cheap vodka help you recover?
Well, I don't know if I would say it helped me recover.
Or inspired you or led you to that?
Honestly, the fact that the last day of my using career was me drinking cheap vodka at Peace Park in Madison, Wisconsin as a home bum. The fact that it was cheap vodka and all of that, the fact that it was such an undesirable situation. Now, granted, I've been in a lot of undesirable situations. Getting my ass kicked at that strange house by those weird people, almost falling into the Mississippi River, squatting in Manhattan in a vacant bar that had rats that are bigger than my dog, living under a bridge in Portland, Oregon, watching people overdose on a daily basis. Somehow, in my mind, none of those situations were as bad or as pathetic as the State Street home bums drinking cheap vodka at Peace Park. And there I was. I was 30 years old. And I hitchhiked all over the country and always ended up finding my way back to Madison because Madison is my home. I'm sitting at Peace Park having just a week prior survived my 13th overdose, wondering what in the hell I'm still doing alive. 7 months prior to that, I discovered my best friend Mike dead of an overdose. Again, feeling a level of responsibility in that situation. One, because I gave him his first shot of heroin. And two, because when I left him in that apartment, I said I would be right back. And I ended up walking around downtown for about an hour. If I'd come right back, maybe I would have discovered him sooner. And he wouldn't have become brain dead as a result of his overdose. He was revived by paramedics because I did call 911 almost reluctantly, because that's a scary situation. Luckily, there are laws in place now to protect people so they can call 911 for their friends who are overdosing, and not have to worry about the consequences, the legal consequences. But as a result of his overdose, he was brain dead, and then his mother decided to take him off life support. That situation really, that was the tipping point. That pushed my use into a realm of self-deprecating self-destruction that I really that I never really experienced prior to that. All of this escalated to a point where I was drinking every single day, straight booze, putting down like liters of whiskey and rum on a daily basis in an empty stomach because food just made me sick. I would wake up every morning and throw up bile. My body was beginning to reject itself. My liver was outstanding, and I don't mean like it was like functioning well. I mean like it was protruding, and I could literally see it. And using any other drug that I could find to just numb myself down and to punish myself as much as possible. In all of this stuff, I held on to this belief that, like, well, no matter what happens, at least I'm not one of those State Street humbums drinking cheap vodka at Peace Park. And there I was on June 6th, 2009, Saturday morning, drinking cheap vodka at Peace Park, a bum in my hometown. And being a bum in your hometown basically means that everybody, including you, has completely given up hope that you will ever be successful in any way. The night before, I had panhandled enough money to buy a half gallon of whiskey and a single can of soda and a pouch of rolling tobacco. I realized that I could have got a liter of whiskey and some food, but times being what they were, food wasn't exactly a priority. Somebody at the apartment that I was hanging out at the time, I was homeless by choice. Actually, I'd been living with a woman prior to that, and decided to leave and go and camp out in a tent because she kept harping on me about my drug use. She didn't like the fact that I was using heroin and alcohol and all that other stuff, but mostly that she didn't like that I did heroin, and I didn't want to listen to her bitch at me about why I should save my life. So I was like, I'm just gonna move out and go live in my tent, and I was fine with that. And so I was in this apartment, and there was a guy there that, while I was asleep, stole not only my whiskey but also my tobacco. The next morning I woke up, realized this, and was like, all right, I'm gonna go and find him, but I'm gonna try to spend as much time in this bed as I can, because I didn't often get to sleep in beds. But eventually it got to the point where my alcohol withdrawal was so significant at that point, because I drank every single day then. I kind of like swapped, like, somewhere through the years where like alcohol became much more accessible, and especially in this area, acceptable to have to some extent. but I was chemically dependent on alcohol. So if I didn't drink, I would shake and go into convulsions and suffer such high blood pressure that I would like itch all over my body. It was crazy. And delusions, psychosis, hallucinations. But I held out in that bed as long as I could. Eventually my shakes got to be so bad, I was like, okay, I have to go. I have to find him. I have to get my whiskey. I'm also going to prove a point, and I'm going to show him why he shouldn't mess with me. Well, I found him at Peace Park, and he was so utterly shit-faced. It was, I mean, you could see it from like 100 feet away. This guy was so visibly drunk. It was crazy. And I sat there and I waited for him to get up. And when I thought, okay, well, eventually he'll get up, he'll walk off the street, and then I'll confront him, and I'll get my whiskey back, and I'm gonna kick his ass, right? I guess, all 119 pounds of me. 12 of that was probably my liver. He eventually stood up, and I heard him mumble something about going to take a piss. He took 2 steps and fell right on his face and busted his eyebrow open. He was bleeding. I had a bunch of napkins in my back pocket because, I lived outside. So I helped him up, actually, with like the remaining bit of humanity that I had. Mostly due to the fact that I had a dog named Buddy that I took care of throughout like the 5.5 years preceding that. And I think taking care of Buddy throughout my addiction kept some humanity in me. It gave me something to care about other than myself. Mm-hmm. And that was good. And I had him for another 5.5 years after getting clean, and eventually had to put him down, which was very sad. But I'm glad that I was able to give him such an amazing life. But anyway, so with my last remaining bit of humanity, I helped this guy up. I put the napkins on his face, and I tell him, "You're lucky you kicked your own ass, because I was going to do much worse." And somebody saw him bleeding and called an ambulance. An ambulance came, took him away. I commandeered his backpack. In his backpack, I found my half-gallon of whiskey. Unfortunately, what was remaining in it was mostly beer. He had mixed beer with the remaining bit of the whiskey together, which just blew my mind. I mean, who does that? Who mixes beer and whiskey? That's weird. And they're both like really cheap versions of both, like really cheap beer and really cheap whiskey mixed together. It was terrible. I tried it and I couldn't even drink it. But he also had a little bit of vodka in there, and I don't know where he stole that, but I'm sure he did. But there was about this much vodka in the bottom of a bottle, and I was like, all right, that will work. That will work to get my shakes off. And so I went over to the liquor store, and there was a soda machine. I got like a fruit punch or something, and I mixed it in a cup that I found in the garbage. And I'm sitting there, and I'm sipping down this cheap vodka, just trying to not shake. And then it occurred to me
that you're in a Peace Park.
I'm in Peace Park
drinking cheap
vodka. I'm 30 years old. I'm a bum in my hometown. This is the best my life will ever be. And it's terrible. I didn't want to do that anymore. And I told myself that. I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to continue living like this. I won't.